What's up, everyone? It's Brandon here again for another video. I'm just going to be recording while I'm driving because why the hell not? So basically what I want to talk about today is partially some of the stuff that happened to me during the last half of 2020. This was absolutely the craziest year of my life. Or craziest 6 months of my life, most intense 6 months. So much happened. One of the first things I want to say is, I have endorsed psychedelics and psychedelic use for people with bipolar disorder in some of my videos. I've also talked about, certain risks and, said to be careful too. I didn't just say, yeah, it's perfectly safe for everybody to do as much, as high of doses of psychedelics as, you want while having bipolar disorder. I don't think I've ever said anything like that. But I just want to reiterate the risk side of using psychedelics because, the majority of what I went through in the last half of 2020, which, was in many ways kind of the best period of my life, but also was the most difficult period of my life, was mainly caused by psychedelic use. I had, one manic episode that was pretty much directly triggered by using LSD. I took 10 tabs at once. I don't recommend these doses especially for bipolar people, but, there is actually a small percentage of people with bipolar disorder who I would recommend this for, but, that's a small percentage, and it's people focused on a very specific thing, and who are not worried about any price that they would have to pay to get that thing. And I can talk about that more later on. But yeah, basically for pretty much everyone, I would say, high-dose psychedelic trips are something, most people with bipolar disorder living normal lives with normal goals and desires, really high-dose trips are pretty risky for you. But anyway, so yeah, I had an episode that was, pretty much directly triggered by that. It was probably, it could arguably be said that it was my worst manic episode up to that point. I don't know, it's hard to really say that, but it was very severe. Throughout this, the different manic episodes that I had during this, period of last year, I actually found many kind of natural ways through certain behaviors to increase mania during an episode. And I probably shouldn't tell any of you about how to do that, because it would be kind of irresponsible for me telling you ways to have stronger manias. Again, there is a small percentage of you, or at least of all people with bipolar disorder, that maybe that would be a good thing to tell them, but, I'm not going to give that information, haphazardly on the internet for everyone to see. That would be kind of reckless. So anyway, I had one trip, I keep saying trip for manic episodes. It's kind of funny. My manic episodes essentially became, in ways, kind of prolonged versions of a psychedelic trip, in an interesting way. I guess maybe that's why I keep confusing the words here in this video. So anyway, I had that really strong manic episode triggered by a very high dose of LSD, at least very high relative to what most people take when they take it. So now the next, I think I had maybe one episode after that wasn't necessarily directly triggered by a psychedelic. It's really hard for me to remember some of the specifics, or what time frames things actually happened in, as far as like a clear sequence of events, just because so much crazy shit happened to me in the span of about 5 to 6 months. It's just hard to remember all of that accurately. But anyway, I think I might have had one episode, that appeared to not be directly caused by psychedelic use. But you have to keep in mind that I would say psychedelics were the main trigger of all of the manic episodes that I had last year. And this doesn't necessarily mean that it was like a chemical immediate trigger like you might think of. That, of course, can happen, and did happen for me, but a lot of it is kind of like this cumulative effect, like when you do, some trips that basically push you into the more manic range. You might find, I found personally for me, that I essentially existed in a more manic range for quite a while throughout that, half of the year. And, it's hard to say. Would I have had, maybe a manic episode, maybe at most 2, without doing any psychedelics that year? It's possible. But, would I have had as many as I had last year without any psychedelic use? I find that that's just probably, there's a low chance of that being the case in my eyes. Again, I might have had another manic episode after the LSD experience that, wasn't like an immediate triggered effect. But whether there was an episode at that point or not, between, the LSD-induced manic episode and what I'm about to talk about next, I can't fully remember accurately. Maybe if I asked, a family member or friend, about that time, I could find out more accurately, but I'm just, going off the top of my head right now. So, anyway, I had an episode probably, let's say, about 3 months or so after the first episode of that year that was triggered by LSD. And I actually, this was triggered by ayahuasca. I actually went to a legitimate Native American church in the United States, and legally took ayahuasca with a shaman and a few other people who were there to facilitate the experience for a group of us. And so anyway, I actually took like a moderate dose of ayahuasca, and it actually was the weakest psychedelic trip that I've ever had. But what was really interesting to me was that this basically immediately cured my depression in a way that nothing else ever had before. Now, I mentioned that, in this kind of last half of the year, I had a lot of manic energy there, but there also were many depressed times too. And I think a lot of the depression came from over-medication, which basically I was, being over-medicated to try to control the mania, and then, it would work, but then, there would come a point where, that was so much medication in my system that it was basically impossible for me to feel happiness in a normal way, without any manic energy, basically fighting against the medications that were essentially trying to bring me down. bring my mood down. So anyway, I was experiencing depression for a while before I went to the ayahuasca retreat. The ayahuasca did an incredible job at completely eradicating the depression. The problem comes that there was another person with bipolar disorder at the retreat who had been to the same retreat once before. And after his first retreat, he felt that he no longer needed medication. And I'm not going to say that this is a bad idea for him or for some people, but for me, to function to any real degree in normal society, I need some medication at least at this point in my life. That is just the case. It just wouldn't work very well if I was on no medication, and I know that with a pretty high degree of certainty. So he told his story of how after his first retreat he quit his medications with the help of his doctor. His doctor weaned him off and everything, and he had been happier and felt healthier ever since. So that's great for him, but I was pretty well aware that being over medicated was a big contributing factor to my depression at this point. So when I heard someone else with bipolar disorder talk about getting off their medications entirely, I pretty much made the decision that right after the retreat I was going to go off all of my meds, and that's what I did. And essentially, the ayahuasca did an amazing job, even, with my medications in my system, at raising, my mood from pretty decently depressed and consistently depressed to, feeling amazing, very authentic for, I felt really about as authentic as I ever have. The only times that have rivaled that level of authenticity have been when I was manic, but this wasn't necessarily manic authenticity. It was more refined, more controlled, but still felt very genuine and authentic, and that was great. But anyway, so I had this, the ayahuasca essentially lifted my mood up to, I would say above, normal. And this wasn't really a manic range whatsoever. I wouldn't have even called this hypomanic, really. I would just call this, pure, beautiful happiness and, really good mental health. Better than probably the majority of the human population has ever experienced. But, the problem comes, I chose to quit my medication, which was essentially still fighting to keep my mood at, a typical level. And, when I was already, operating at, a better than normal mood, and I remove everything that's trying to keep my mood from going too high, it was a pretty clear recipe for disaster, to trigger an incredibly intense mania. So, that's what happened. It was a very strong manic episode, and then I had multiple manic episodes kind of back to back. I would have a manic episode, go to the hospital, try to live my normal life for maybe a week or so in the episode. Then eventually I would go to the hospital because, it seemed like there was no hope of this being controlled anywhere else. I would be in the hospital for 1 to 2 weeks. And then I would get out of the hospital and be in essentially a kind of recovery mode from the episode for about 2 weeks to 1 month, roughly. for each of these occurrences. I had 5 manic episodes last year, and only one of them I did not go to the hospital for. Only one of them was I able to kind of hang on to the edge of the cliff by my cracking fingernails to avoid going to the hospital, which I think was good. The hospital is it's a last resort kind of place for me, and it, poses many severe disadvantages to my life when I go to the hospital. Not only is the experience itself rather unpleasant, it costs a lot of money, which my insurance has not done a great job in covering, which really sucks. I lose time, where I could be working or, doing any number of things other than being in the hospital and essentially doing nothing else with my time there. So yeah, it's not the optimal place for me, but in certain cases when I am extremely manic, it is the right choice. So anyway, yeah, one of the episodes out of 5, I was able to, stay out of the hospital. The other 4, I went to the hospital. Again, probably spent, anywhere from a few days to a week being manic before going to the hospital in each of those 4 occurrences. Then 1 to 2 weeks in the hospital, and again, 2 weeks to 1 month, or even slightly longer than 1 month, kind of in recovery before I was able to return to work or really do anything on that level of my normal life again. So basically, I was, going through some pretty rapid cycling at this point. I would say things got worse after the manic episode triggered by, the ayahuasca experience and going off my medications for a few days. That was, I'd say that had an overall stronger effect on, where my mental health went for the last half of last year than actually the high dose LSD trip. And the thing is, I really think that I wouldn't have had really any problems with mania if I would have stayed on my normal medications, after the ayahuasca experience. If I had, stayed on normal meds, I probably would have been just fine. But, I chose to go off my meds, and, that's where it got me. It got me to, a series of very intense manic episodes. And that's what happened. So, yeah, I've talked a lot about kind of things being triggered by psychedelic use. I'm not sure if I should talk about it right now, all of the strange, amazing, and beautiful and challenging things that happened to me throughout all of these episodes. That would take a while to explain in proper depth. But yeah, so so far this video has been dedicated toward kind of explaining the risks. I am really struggling with my camera mount right now. Yeah, so far I've just been explaining the risks of using psychedelics and just reiterating that. And I think that's important. I think okay, I'm just gonna hold the camera. Just gonna drive with one hand, we'll be fine. Yeah, so that's essentially why I would, recommend almost against using psychedelics for most people with bipolar disorder. It's, if you use them often and you use them at high doses, it especially if you're someone with type 1 bipolar disorder, the more severe type, or at least the type that has more severe manic episodes, it's going to destabilize your life. Now the question comes, is that loss in stability for some of these really beautiful experiences worth it? To most people, I would say no, it's not worth it. Most people would probably judge a lot of the things that I went through as really negative or, overly challenging, stuff like that. But for me, they were very important. For me, I would say all of it was worth it. And if I had the choice to live, those same 6 months over again, with all of the memory of the experiences that I have now, I don't know if I would really, let me just be clear, I would not choose to take less psychedelics than I did. What they showed me, what I experienced, was actually very, very important to me, and I got a lot out of it. I paid a hefty price, just off of one hospitalization that wasn't, that was only partially covered by insurance. Just off that one hospitalization, I owe like $21,000 or $22,000. So, that's quite a big cost. And I also lost a lot of friends, even experienced some distance from family members I would have considered very close before all of this happened. This is really one person in specific, and essentially, it was a lot of the friction that came was due to her religious beliefs, and how a lot of what I was doing was contradicting, and what I was saying was contradicting, against her beliefs. But so yeah, I lost many people in my life who were, important to me at the time, and who I thought had my back. So that sucked. I, have significant hospital bills from that time. I gave away a lot of money. I spent more money. All in all, the decision to use psychedelics as a person with bipolar disorder type 1 has costed me at least $50,000 in the past 2 years or so, just in things that you can easily quantify, such as medical bills that are not covered by my insurance, money that I gave away to people that was never given back, increased spending, 2 instances where my car was damaged, one time where it was totaled. I didn't get into any type of collision. What actually happened was I drove my car, which was a Toyota Prius, a 2007 Toyota Prius, at its maximum speed for about 3 or 4 hours straight. And this essentially, it basically fried and destroyed multiple key systems needed to run the car, to the point where the car was totaled once that whole event was over. And that's just what happened. So, that costed me probably at least $5,000. And yeah, so the total of things that are easily quantifiable is, at or above $50,000 for my rough estimations. Now, this doesn't include things such as my employment being affected by, all the time that I missed working, because I was in the hospital, or because my, mental health was, in such a severe state to where I couldn't work. And then also keep in mind that I experienced, my hours were cut back at work after all of this. After my last trip to the hospital, they told me that, hey, we're going to cut you from, full-time 40 hours to part-time 20 hours. They didn't mention my mental health whatsoever in this, but they also didn't give really any explanation for why this was happening. Did they do this because of my mental health? I think there's a decent chance they did. There is a possibility that they didn't. Not making any accusations, but that is something to keep in mind. If I had 0 manic episodes and I didn't have the serious depressive episode at the end of the year that I had, if none of that happened, would my position have been somewhat randomly changed? I'm highly doubtful of that. But so we have to consider that as, even more money that was lost. Also, my future at that place of employment, what was caused by that. The loss in reputation that I experienced publicly was quite large, because I was posting about 40 times per day while I was manic on Facebook during some very intense manic episodes. So you can only imagine how that would change, if you were to do that. If you were to do, 40 posts of your most radical thoughts and experiences and beliefs that were held during your most intense manic episode. If you can just picture doing that, posting 40 times per day about that kind of stuff, just imagine the kind of impact that would have on your reputation when we're talking about this information being shared with, most people on your Facebook, in your community. They don't really know you that well. They don't even really know that you have a mental health condition. They don't understand the intricacies and nuance of that mental health condition. And they, a lot of what happened is just not well understood by the people who were witnesses to it. And that's a big problem. And that's something that you inevitably will experience as a person.